Good morning, 222. Last week we discussed honor, above reproach, living by a biblical standard. We used Job as the biblical model of that trait, and I hope you remember those things because wasn't he an incredible fellow, blameless, fearing God, hating evil. Today we're going to dive into responsibility using another great character of the Bible, Daniel. And responsibility is defined as trustworthiness demonstrated over time. Most of us understand that you can do the right thing once or twice, but it's doing it repeatedly that makes you a man who can be really trusted. It's a man who, when given a job, will do it and do it every time, not just sometimes. In Daniel's life, to show you about his trustworthiness, especially over a period of time, he served as one of the top 3 administrators in 3 different kingdoms. That is, under 3 different kings: King Nebuchadnezzar, King Belshazzar, and King Darius. He became 80 years old by the time this book ends, a little bit longer than that actually. And so he was actually an advisor for something close to 65 years. While it is true that Daniel was trustworthy over time, how did he become so trustworthy? What can we learn from that? And the answer is it was one decision at a time. One small choice made every single time. He was faithful in the little things and was later given opportunities to be in charge of larger things. There, of course, is a parable in the New Testament that talks about being faithful in a few things to be given more responsibility later. And Daniel certainly understood that in his life. So let's review how Daniel became so trustworthy and dependable. In the year 605 BC, Daniel and some Hebrew boys around the ages of 15 to 18, give or take, were taken from their homes in Jerusalem. They were yanked out of their homes, to be honest with you. They were then marched. There were no cars, there were no buses, they couldn't take them that way. They were marched 543 miles from Jerusalem to Babylon. That would be the equivalent of somebody taking you from Westerville to New York City. What a remarkable thing, right? That's a long walk. And along the way, I'm sure that Daniel had a lot of opportunities to reflect on God, to think about, God, where are you? At least let me put it in my terms. If that happened to me, I'd have a lot of questions along the way. Would I hate God? Would I trust him? Would I depend on him? Would I constantly be asking, why me? Remember we talked about Arthur Ashe, who didn't ask that question? I don't even know exactly how I'd feel, but I don't think it would be all that much fun. Well, Daniel knew, in addition to that, he knew he'd probably never see his home again, certainly not his parents. And almost immediately upon arrival in Babylon, Daniel was forced to make a significant choice. He and his friends were given meat. That meat probably was not killed. Well, undoubtedly, it was not killed in accordance with Jewish dietary laws. And there were other items on that not on a strict diet. In fact, there could have been some of those things that were actually sacrificed to idols, which would have been an absolutely anathema to Daniel. Do you have any drop-dead convictions? Daniel did. But my question is, do you have any? Things that you absolutely would not, that you'd die for? Well, those things, those drop-dead convictions, they have to be made in advance. Daniel did. And in Daniel 1:8, again, one of the greatest verses in the Bible, Daniel says this when offered that food to eat. He says, he purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore, he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Notice, Daniel didn't demand anything. He didn't get up in the guy's face. He didn't pitch a fit. He requested that he not have to eat the prescribed foods. And he made the guy a suggestion. He said, look, if you give us this stuff for 10 days and we look awful, then we'll start to eat your stuff. But of course, God favored them and made them look great, and they then were able to eat the way they wanted to eat. In fact, in Daniel 1:9 it says, now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. God rewarded Daniel's humility with favor. Remember that great verse we talk about occasionally, 1 Samuel 2:30b? Those who honor me, I will honor. And that is exactly what God did here. This began the road to Daniel being seen as trustworthy. Now, the incident which really secured Daniel's favor with King Nebuchadnezzar happened in chapter 2. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and he couldn't figure out what the dream meant, so he called on his wise men. They not only had to tell him what the dream meant, they had to tell him the dream itself. In fact, he said this, the command from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a rubbish heap. Ouch. I mean, it's tough enough to determine what the dream means, but to actually have to figure out the dream that happened in his head, whoa. So the Chaldeans said to him, nobody can tell you the dream. And they began to round up the wise men, including Daniel, so that they could kill him. Well, when they came to Daniel, he replied with discretion and discernment. And he asked to see the king. Didn't demand, didn't jump up and down. He asked to see the king. And he asked that he and his friends might request compassion from the God of heaven. What is that? They prayed. He and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego went off and they prayed and they asked God to reveal the dream and to reveal the interpretation. And God gave Daniel the answer to that dream in Daniel. And Daniel praised God. You know, sometimes I wonder how often we ask God for answers to prayer and we get the answers and we don't even thank God. Daniel did immediately. In fact, in Daniel 2, verses 20 to 23, here's an incredible praise that Daniel made for God. He said, let the name of God be blessed forever and ever. For wisdom and power belong to him. It is he who changes the times and the epochs, and he removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to the wise men and knowledge to the men of understanding. It is he who reveals the profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and power. Even now you have made known to me what we have requested of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. So basically, he told him what the dream was, and he told him the interpretation. Daniel was able to give that to Nebuchadnezzar, who then rewarded him and made him one of the top 3 administrators in his kingdom. Later in Daniel's life, when he was serving in the 3rd kingdom, some people were envious of him, and they wanted to do him harm. But they had a problem. And here's the problem. Wouldn't this be great for you and me? He says, the scriptures say, then the commissioners and satraps began trying to find ground of accusation against Daniel in regard to government affairs. But they could find no ground of accusation or evidence of corruption, inasmuch as he was faithful, and no negligence or corruption was to be found in him. No negligence or corruption. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. That is commitment, honor, and it is responsibility, trustworthiness demonstrated over time. Now, even though Daniel was such a man of integrity, the Lord allowed him to be tested, and he was thrown into the lion's den because he refused to stop praying to God. That's what the edict said. The edict said that you could only pray to this statue that they'd made of King Darius. But Daniel prayed with the windows open, I might add. He knew he could be seen, and yet he prayed 3 times a day, just as had always been his custom, and he refused to stop it. He refused to be deterred by someone other than God so that he could go before the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and he could thank him and give praise to him. So he was thrown in the lion's den. And by the way, King Darius gave the orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. And the king spoke, and he said to Daniel, can you imagine this? He said, your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you. Daniel 6:16. Wow, what a witness. Here it is, you've got a guy, King Darius, who was a non-believer, but Daniel's impact on him was so great that he knew God would save Daniel, that he knew God had the power to save Daniel. He exemplifies, that is, Daniel exemplifies so many of the manly traits of a man in the Bible. Commitment, honor, responsibility, initiative, service, and truth, even obviously. But he also models humility and action. He rejects passivity. He's a man of prayer. And what can we learn from this? Well, as we imitate Christ, we will model the traits of the Christ acrostic more so every day as Daniel did. But it doesn't happen by accident. It happens with intentionality and with courage, I might add. And I want to make an aside for a moment. As a wrestling coach for many, many years, I came to understand that most young men, if they are wrestling only for themselves, like if they're in a tournament and they're wrestling unattached, and they're not wrestling for the team, they will quit on themselves far more often than you would believe. If they're on their back and getting ready to get pinned, they will quit on themselves often. But if you put them in a duel match in that same situation, and they represent their team, and they know that to lose badly costs their team more points, they will fight like crazy not to get pinned. You see, I believe that you need to have teammates in your life. I believe that teammates act that way. We can talk about accountability. We can talk about all kinds of stuff. I like to view it as having a teammate in my life, someone I can bounce ideas off of, and someone I care about, and someone I will fight for. And I won't quit on myself because I don't want to let them down. Somebody asked me earlier this year, what was my accountability? And I'll tell you flat out, most of it is I don't want to let the men on the Crusader coaching staff down. The men around me, the men that have faith in me, I don't want to let them down. They are my teammates. They are important to me. So if you're looking for a teammate, ask your shepherd for a suggestion as to how you might get hooked up with somebody. So be intentional this week. Honor Jesus. See you next Saturday, Lord willing, and the creeks don't rise.